Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
Hey, listeners of the Software People Stories podcast. We're so excited to share with you that our 100th episode is just around the corner. We invite you to join us as we hit the century mark and celebrate. We invite your comments as listeners of our podcast to either write into us or leave us an audio recording. As always, our email is podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.
Today, I'm in conversation with Jayant Swamy, who's an author, improv speaker, and excellent program manager. He talks about himself as a glue that holds team together and somebody who brings the best of the people. He talks about his experience of two different projects being funnel for the business to relate to and the technology team to influence. And he also shares how he has developed as a teacher and as a storyteller. Listen on. Hi, Jen. Good evening to you, and thank you for appearing in the Software People Stories. How are you doing today?
Oh, very well, Gayatri. Thank you for the opportunity.
When we get started, I wanted to hear your introduction. Mighty interesting. How do you introduce yourself to the software pattern?
To the software fraternity would be a tough question. Let me just throw out a few things about myself first. I do have an MBA from the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, the 1992 batch. And after that, my career has been checkered. It's not followed any traditional path. I would say I've just gone after my heart, just done whatever I wanted to at some point. And there have been times when I've done what I have to. So that's how it's been. And I started off in management consulting. Then I did a stint as manager in financial planning and analysis at GE India. And then I was also a guest faculty on a business school. It's called IIM in Bangalore for 2 years. Then my wife and I, we moved to the US. And given that my background was mostly in management, so the closest fit I had to start off in a job here was in the SAP space. And also when I management consulting, I was mostly doing what those days was popular as corporate planning, perspective planning, business planning. And then I was also involved in business process management. So all of this kind of helped me to get onto the SAP space. And that's where I worked for 12 years. I mostly worked as a program manager at any given point in time, owning and implementing multiple projects. Then around 2012, I was bitten by this, I am a square peg in a round hole kind of syndrome. And that's because my interests were more, I kind of felt like I was an artist caught in the career of a scientist, because I'm more of a right-brained kind of person, but then until then, traditionally, I had got, though consulting did offer a lot more perspective, including for lateral thinking, I mainly got constrained in a very left-brained profession, I felt. And so that's when I came out of the typical software industry job. And the last 8 years, I'm still fairly intricately been involved with the software industry, except my roles have changed. And I no longer manage the technical folk. I manage more of the processes and people. And the reputation I've been building is one of He's the glue who holds everybody together. He's the one who builds relationships. And then he's a good coach and mentor. So that's kind of been the image that I have, or reputation I have garnered after coming out of the IT role.
Wow, what a great journey, Jen. I have so many questions to ask. I want to get started with what you want to do and what you have. Can you give us a few examples on that? Because all of us go through that, right? Some of us more so than others.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what I want to do is fairly simple. I like to write. I like to talk. I like to teach. I like to interact with people. So trainer, writer. So I am a published author. I do training on the side. So it has been those expectations or aspirations have been met. And then also though I did say that I did what I had to do, that was for just a brief period and maybe specific to an IT role. Because when I think of my role as a manager, right, I kind of see I do end up doing all of these in some capacity or the other. There is some writing, there are those presentations you make, and there is putting up to the leadership. And then there's always coaching and mentoring your team members. And then there's writing, of course, you do get to write reports sometimes. So that's kind of my distinction of what I like to do, what I want to do. It's just a nuance, I guess. But definitely what I don't want to do anymore is be in a role of managing the technical side of a software project. And the simple reason is my expertise does not lie there, because I do not come from a typical technology or technical background. It's, I would say, an acquired skill. My natural skill is really more management. And of course, finance is the domain where I do have considerable expertise, because before I did my MBA, I did pick up chartered accountancy. I did it because I was fairly good at maths, I guess. But after doing it, I started feeling that it was too boring for me. It was too routine. And that's kind of why I went and did an MBA. At least in the 90s, I thought that would offer us more options. And it did, because it helped me to get into consulting.
So while today, most of the ERP systems, be it Salesforce and everything is in cloud. When you got started, it must have been the in-house, in the data warehouse, creating the data and everything, right? So how was your journey? Was there a value, first of all, and making the business understand that there is a need for all the data to be in one place? And then after that, there is a correlation, then intelligence, and then cleanup and stuff. So how was that convincing stakeholders, given that you have the nuance as well as the background in that? Because I have often found it very hard to get business to do that, because that brings out a lot of discipline, operational excellence, and a lot of it in one place, right?
That, I think, let me answer it slightly differently. I was not so high up that I had to, let's say, manage stakeholders' expectations of the SAP system itself. That used to be mostly my boss who used to do that.
Okay.
So the pressure was off me for that level of convincing. But what I ended up managing, right, was mostly the business process streams: order to cash, financials, procure to pay. So, and there I found it there I had no problems. Because see, the business is, this is what we want to do. Can you solve this problem? And at least with me, the advantage they saw was that I understood their world way better than I did the technical world. So I was really their interface with the technical folks that I did manage. And then it was really people skills, talking to the technical folks, explaining it to them or speccing it out. And I always prided myself as more a business person. And if we ever had to sell a technical solution or convince the business or any stakeholder about its validity, I would play the role of looking at the advantages, disadvantages, but I would always have the lead technical architect or the programmer with me. And he or she I would rely on them to really go deep and explain the technical nuances because neither did I understand it well enough to explain it. And I had no hang up getting them looped in or involved. And in fact, I enjoyed showcasing them because a lot of the time, technical people are very intelligent, very smart, but they don't necessarily want to be in the front end. For some people, it's a skill that is worth developing, which I enjoy doing. Because when I was doing teaching, or then I also did the stint where I used to train MBA students for GMAT and then for CAT. And then I would train them how to do public speaking, how to participate in group discussions, how to take their interviews. All this was in the early 90s, mid 90s. So given all that, right? So for me, it was always about empowering my team members, even if they were just peers. Not necessarily did they always report up to me. Because when you're a program manager, sometimes you even have people couple of levels higher than me reporting to me just for the sake of the project. So I had to get a lot of work done without really having any authority over anybody. That's where, the gift of the gab, the being a little touchy-feely and sensitive to other people, definitely having the empathy and empowering them to step up. These skills really helped me. And that's why I say management, getting work done through others is always what I see as my core competence.
Okay.
If I were to do it myself, I don't think I would really be that very good. A lot of these, especially if it's something very technical, I wouldn't be good at all. And even others, that's what I found. Better at getting things done than doing them myself. It's a skill.
Agree. And the people skills and collaboration, right? Most of the projects, many big projects fail. Could not be incrementally developed, or there were really process issues that made it go wrong. Can you share some examples of success stories in this management consulting? Anything that stands out?
So, of course, I do use the word management consulting loosely, but I did work in Microsoft and T-Mobile. I was really a program manager within working there. And so projects-wise, interesting. The last 6 years has been more management consulting, I would say, because I do take a curated variety of projects. And let's start with the latest, because what really amused me is that suddenly now there is this whole product management, which is really an offshoot of program management. And I kind of get the concept because even when I was working as a program manager, I always used to say, whatever work we do has to be productized. We should be able to reuse it at the drop of a hat. So whether it's setting up the processes or the documentation, right? Or the skill set, or even documenting the methodology. So that's how I always saw it. So last year I worked at Nordstrom. It was a hardcore leasing related project because now leasing, the new rule, the accounting standards brought out a new rule, which is now mandatory, is that until up to 2 to 3 years back, if companies had leased assets and liabilities, they need not have shown them on their balance sheets. Because, money-wise, they wash, the debits and credits usually wash, but since a lot of companies have huge billions worth of assets, so the accounting standard said, you know what, even if it is just setting off assets and liabilities, we want to see it. So I did work on a couple projects there, one in Microsoft, one in Nordstrom. The Nordstrom one really turned out to be interesting because my role was that of help with the implementation on the business, basically help the business program manager. So once we started the project, we found it's a fairly simple product that needs some configuration and customizing. Then obviously I was the one who was the early adopter, looking at the features, working with the vendor, and then actually directing what changes had to be done. It came from the Nordstrom team, but then I was the interface. So I had to understand the product a little more than I normally would have as a program manager. And that was fun. And maybe because it is a product, I knew what it was doing, the features, and we had worked out with the vendors. Then everything fell in place, right? Then I was managing the testing, getting the team to test it, but I was the one who was directing and actually coming up with the testing methodology of deciding what should be tested, coach and train all the other users on how to adopt the project. That's another example, right? Where on one hand, yes, I did enjoy getting my hands and feet wet and getting a little more technical than I normally would have. But the other side is, it gave me immense satisfaction because I was kind of architecting the business side of testing. And then I was also doing the training and coaching. And I also had a couple of vendors who had to develop a manual. And then I was kind of the architect of the manual. They wrote it up, but then I was the one who was conceptualizing. In many ways, all my passions rolled together. So that is one that I enjoyed recently. And before that, believe it or not, at Microsoft, we did a similar implementation of the leasing system, but the project was totally different. The role there for me was a lot of data modeling, financial modeling, balance sheet analysis. And it's really 150 company codes. So every one of them has probably a different currency. And there are 4 types of currencies that were being used. So it was a fun exercise. This is, again, I had never done anything that deep in finance before. That level of financial modeling, using my accounting knowledge, and then reconciling all the balance sheets in the different currencies and making decisions on how currency exchange differences could be accounted for. That was fun. And again, the project was a huge success because despite the huge value and the volume, we did meet under plus or minus 3% accuracy. We were able to implement the project in the given time. It's not really an error. The difference is something we reconcile after it's implemented, right? It's acceptable to implement and move forward, and then a month or 2 post-implementation is spent in reconciling the differences. So the accounting is... So these 2, I would say, were the latest 2 I did were more fun. And I hadn't thought of it. Talking to you, suddenly they seem so much more fun. I hadn't thought of them as that much fun. I just enjoyed when I...
Most of the time, I think when we relate to our own journey, right, it makes us that much more nicer and much better. The first project, it almost sounds like you were the product owner for a lot of the parts, be it from a business testing, architecting the testing, or technical manual, right? While you are not writing it, but you are giving requirements, you are championing the team. Would you call yourself a product owner under the guise of being a program manager as well?
Let me answer it differently. Since I went in more as a consultant, yes. The person I reported to, he was the product owner. So you got it right. I'm a short timer, right? 6 months or 8 months, I leave and I go away. So he was the official product owner. And basically, whatever he owned is what I was helping him. Just one correction. The manual was for the business. It was not the technical one.
Okay.
Because whatever I did everything was for the big. I use word like architecting, but I meant this is more from the business side. So probably a better word would be the building up the scenario building is probably a better word.
Okay.
It's just the writer in me tends to use these words a little loosely.
That's okay. That's all right. One question, in both your stories, what is reflecting is one is the deeper understanding or learning of the product before getting the team started, and the second part is learning of the financials and being getting yourself better in the domain front of it, from a technical as well as domain. So from a learning part of it, right, that seems to be the recurring theme when I heard you tell your story. How do you motivate yourself to learn when you get something new? There is always fear that, okay, can I learn after a gap of so many years? What makes you on your toes to get that going?
Good question. So again, 2 parts like everything else. One, you won't believe it. For me, things work the other way. If it's monotony, if it's the same thing, I get bored. So if there is something new, the whole thrill of learning something new keeps me going. But having said that, yes, especially as I age, I wouldn't say my capability to learn is limited, but the domains where I can, for example, if it was something very technical, no matter how much I try, I'm not able to learn. So I think that's where my right brain mess helps. What I quickly understand is usually the concept. So I'm fairly good at getting the concept. So that is my approach to learning.
Okay.
And as long as it's not very technical, I'm fairly open to it. Plus, I think I'm open to it. I'm always, I kind of see myself as a lifelong learner. So I'm always looking to see what's new. And that's really how I keep myself going. That's really, in fact, I would say what keeps me up, get up in the morning every day. So that's part of the creativity, right? I mean, had I really been a full-time writer, maybe it would have been, because even in writing, that's what we do, right? When I write a book, even if it's fiction, there is a certain element of research involved. And then when you read, you do the research, okay, this is what somebody said, this is what somebody else said, and this is an unrelated thing. But now what do I think about it? Do I connect the dots where others have not? Do I see a new side to it that others may or may have not? Is how I use it in writing. And of course, when I do it at work, I have to look at it a little differently. I have to look at it as, okay, for the success of the project, what are those 3 things that we need to focus on? So that's how I approach it. Basically, learn by concept and then just go after those 1, 2, 3 critical things. And of course, it's not, other things are important too, but there will always be other people who are good at it, right? And half the work is in identifying who is good at what and who can help you where. So that's also what makes learning easy for me. It doesn't mean, and I don't see learning as knowledge at all. So to me, learning does, and it's not equivalent to gaining knowledge. I may not even remember anything even 6 months after it's done. I see it more as, okay, this is a problem, and we need to get at a solution, and these are the possible solutions. How do we get there? That is the learning for me. And then if somebody else is good at it, it's them solving it, right? I can step back and they can explain it to me. And if there is something they want me to do and help them, I'm willing to do it if they prove themselves to be the expert. So this is how I go about it. Okay. It's kind of the captain of a ship, but they say you can be a leader by following too, right?
Absolutely. Now we keep talking about servant leader. That's the essence of it. So when you're talking to me, it was more around Goldrat's principle of theory of constraint. Understand where the constraint is. For you to understand the constraint, you need to understand the concept and have that mental model to say, okay, where are these things fitting in? And with which block, who's the expert? And then go there. I think that's a very clear or a nuanced art of program management, right? And you have been a trainer, program management, as well as coaching multiple people, able to make their art or a skill better. So, as a coach, as a trainer, how has been your journey with that? And any stories there?
Yeah, I can tell a couple. Yeah, definitely. Like I said, even in the 90s, I used to actually train students to take CAT and other MBA entrances. And what I found then the most popular was, and this was, those days you didn't have camera phones, right? So we would actually organize for a hand, whatever they called it, hand video recorder. And then whenever for every participant, he or she, when they're speaking, we would videograph them. And the first thing I would tell them is, you go watch yourself, feedback yourself, come talk to me. That is the first thing I made them do. And then, of course, I would give them my inputs as well. And after that, we would actually have them, they would get the feedback, they have to incorporate it and do a second presentation on a different subject. And they had to evaluate and see the improvement. So this was one technique I used, and it was very popular because it wasn't very common. We're talking about 90s India, where the rush is more towards getting marks in exams. The fact that somebody was giving people this forum itself made some of these made them very great. Now, having said that, in the last few years, and now that's the other thing, like you were asking about the learning, some things come naturally to me. One is definitely behavioral sciences. For example, any psychometric instrument, right? Or leadership style. Funny thing is, or the good thing is, what I found, I just have to take the test and score myself. And then when I read the profile, I pretty much understand the entire theory behind. So I'm like, okay, this is what they're saying. These are the 4 attributes. Those are the 2x2 matrices, and this is why it happens. It just falls in place. I don't need too much of an explanation. I get it. But I wouldn't say that's how I learn in every other area. So it's just a skill only when it comes to behavioral sciences. So last few years, what I did, since program management is my expertise, I found that training, again, it can get limiting if I'm just offering people and saying interpersonal skills or leadership. I saw that there wasn't a huge market or appetite immediately for that, because the question would be, especially the technology companies, okay, how can we see the results? How does this translate? Then what I did is then a lot of them had project management courses. So I did train at Microsoft also as a trainer, as a guest trainer. I did go and do it. Then I developed my own. I said, okay, I'm good at behavioral sciences. And the feedback I constantly get even on project management is not necessarily for anything else, but for my relationship building with other folks. So I developed a course that I call the art of project management. So what I did is we start off showing them what the science is, what the art is. And that from that point onwards, right, the balance 80% focuses on the art. And when I say the art, it's really leadership, communication. I even have a small module where I do the presentation to the rest of the team. Because on any project, all people have to do all that. That has been the fun experience. And I also run this at the University of Washington now. It's for their staff, not for the students.
Okay.
This is part of their HR and OD. So I offered it and they liked it. And I had a wide variety of participants on the couple classes I ran. I had right from a project director to a project coordinator, all from different departments. And the other thing I do on my training is they're fully participation oriented. I have my own repertoire of management games that I constantly update and use. And really the goal is they should have fun. They should not have a minute's rest where they're just listening to me. If I have to just speak and they have to listen to me, that's not fun for me or them. That's the style I've been cultivating. And that's, I feel, has been my success. Did I answer?
Yeah. I think what you said is almost a teacher or a trainer in you has been evolving over the years, right from your CAT days to today. Graduating from somebody who's trying to give the entrance exam to actually a college educator, a director of program management to do that. I think I really see that as evolution as a trainer. I'm also curious when you talk about games, how are you doing it in the COVID times? Have you also made it all online, or is it more of some of them will be in person? How are you adapting to the COVID times, trainer?
Yeah, so the training, of course, I get very few assignments in a year. It's not that I'm overloaded or anything.
Okay.
So I did have a session with the University of Washington that was scheduled for April. So we had to cancel it because that's when COVID started. And a lot of what I do, since it's behavioral stuff, it's not very easy to make it go online. I do have the fall sessions are scheduled for late November or December. And then I am going to work on it will have to be a fairly diluted, a subset of the original course, but I'm going to look at it and see how I can make it Zoom friendly. And going forward, probably what I would do is I would have one on-site version and also have its online version. So depending on the circumstances, we would pick whichever would work. Yeah, it's specific to just that's really the only, currently that's the only one I'm working on, because this year has been all about my book that's getting published next month in October. So it's been working on that, the marketing, the cover design, approving the edits. And then in parallel, I'm working on another really confidential project suggested by my agent. So that has been my focus in the last 6 months, apart from my couple of consulting gigs that ended somewhere in June or July. So the training has been fairly, I would say, lean in the last. Going forward, that's the aha I've had. And so just come up with the Zoom version and keep the on-site version intact. Don't need to mess with it totally. That's the approach I've decided to do.
Nice. So we also do a lot of training in the Agile space. What we have done is, of course, as you rightly said, we have kept the on-site version as is, while we have adapted it using the Mural, using the Zoom, using the some of the surveys and everything. We have kind of moved away from the usual one, and we have created a version to be used. So a lot of the games now we can do, at least in our space, may not be in every space, but can deploy it online. While definitely there is a slight dilution is there, we are also seeing some more differences in terms of how we are using it. So that's why I was just a curiosity question as to how.
Go ahead. You were saying about how you have adapted and then how Zoom has thrown up some new opportunities. though there are some
It's
constraints.
not just Zoom. What we're doing is we use a combination of tools, cloud tools. We use something for surveys, online surveys, something for mural to have a whiteboard, which is
Mm.
a whiteboard to use. And we send some material, pre-read material. Using the training from the back of the room, we actually make them do it. And some games we have that they can online using Google Drive and stuff. So I think we've used or we have exploited a few digital tools to make the experience as close as possible. This is an ongoing thing because now more and more teams want to be agile, where that
Mm.
everybody is alone and they don't want the command and control model anymore. Asking this question around other sets of businesses are adapting as well. Yeah,
Yeah, and
I have been holding my horses on your multiple books you authored, and you also spoke about your new book coming up, right? Initial question is, I know authoring a book is part science, part art, which needs a lot of discipline to sit and write. What are your key takeaways having authored so many books?
not so many. So Gayatri, only two novels. But yes, I did write the anthology of a humanitarian. So yes, I do have two more non-fiction that I wrote, and they were not commercial. They were more private organizations, social organizations that were marketing them. So one book was published in 2013, Colors in the Spectrum. The second novel is being published now. So for me, writing is the easy part. Getting it published has been the tough part. Though now I have an agent and he's awesome. So I think that constraint has gone away. So now I work with him and he tells what publishers may be looking for. And that's what I would go after and write. But for me, the writing serves a lot of purposes. One, like I said, I was the right brain, the creative, and at least in our times we could not make a living out of it. So the next best is to have a job that you like, which is what I did, to pay the bills, and then spend a lot of my time writing. And the interest I might have developed right in my school days, because in the 70s and 80s when I grew up, right, Bangalore did not even have TV till 82, for example. And then I was a voracious reader. Even when I was 8 or 10 years old, I was the member of 3 local libraries and stuff like that. So I think somewhere when I read all these books, my mind was more than reading. In addition to reading the story, it was also recording the approach, the format, or how authors write. I think it was all there. Tried somewhere in the mid or late 80s to write a long story, a novella, and sent it off to some local magazines in India. They were all rejected. And then it went on the back burner. And then, when I was actually on the flight coming to this country, that's the time suddenly Vikram Seth, he had become a big name author on the international front. Reading his book, and until then, right, Indian authors did not necessarily become big on the international scene, save for an R.K. Narayan or Naipaul. I started thinking, I too can write. I've just never tried it. Why don't I do it now? And that's how it started. So, but then output has been, I would say, fairly limited, considering I've been doing it for the last 15 years. But for me, the approach is, again, it's more an art than a science. But the funny thing is, having written 2 novels and now I'm working on 2 other books, one non-fiction and the other is a management fable. So I have probably developed a science of my own. So it happens. And so now I understand I have my own format. I cannot write a book with just 1 or 2 characters. I need a minimum of 5 characters whose journeys I trace. And that's kind of becoming a standard feature how I write. And then at some point in time, it develops into a science. I partition them off. I know what the chapters are. I know which character is going to come in when. Of course, it goes through a lot of iteration. That's kind of how it's developing. But of course, a lot of the time I have to start writing, and then it's like you get started on the journey, the path will show itself to a point. That is how I do. So it's like when I reach halfway in the forest, suddenly it all opens up and I know how to get out of it. And that's the point. I actually spend months sometimes just reorganizing and editing and even restructuring whatever I had written so far. I spend a lot of time doing that restructuring at that point in time. But to get there, in the initial days, I have to just keep writing, have an outline maybe. Apart from that, my only advice to anybody would be write. That's the only way. There's no silver bullet. There's no other magic. You have to put pen on paper or words on Microsoft Word and write.
Very, very nicely put in. I feel that your gears are tricking when when you are sending your next set of novel. We just published a book called Five Tantras of Enterprise Agility. Last Saturday we published it. And one of the things that we have found out, at least as a consulting firm, is that we use a writer and we use alongside a owner or a product owner who brings the overall vision of it, and the writing part of it one person does, and a lot of the smaller parts, let's say it's about technical architecture, one person brings the information, and another person talks. We have brainstorming sessions on fables, stories, what can be. I think it is also somewhere we have created a collective wisdom, so to speak, on book writing, but we haven't cracked it. One of my friends used to say, be liberated, just write.
Absolutely.
I think that's exactly what you're also saying. Just don't feel any inhibition in terms of writing, just write.
Absolutely. And it's, of course, there were times I was going through intense periods in my life, and so writing was therapeutic too. And the inhibition part, and that's why I joined up a 9-month fiction writing course at the University of Washington in 2002, way back. And that's exactly what it did to me. I lost all inhibitions. Because every week, right, you have to write something and go workshop it, and everybody else reads it, constructively critiques it. You do the same to them. So once you go through that, right, you're like, it's like an actor, right? I mean, initially you may have inhibition, but then if that's your career, that's what you want to be, that's what you want to do, you have to get to a point where, okay, right or wrong, this is the way, it's just a role. So it's the same with writing too. The other thing you just said also struck a chord. I usually choose material that I know or I understand. So I probably play both roles that you said, the writer and the owner. If I had to write about technical architecture, I would need an owner. So I would probably just take the technical stuff, put it into English, make it user-friendly, put in my stories, appeal to the reader, and then go back and tell the owner, can you make sure that I didn't mess up with the technical stuff, gave the wrong message? And it's interesting. I had to do that. In fact, one of the anthropology I wrote, it was a humanitarian, and she's this very revered person, and we had to write about her life experiences.
Okay.
That's what I learned, and she would be like, no, I did not say, and I said something else. So I could not even get one word wrong. She said, when I met so-and-so, and this is what I told them, it had to be ad verbatim. So I could not just, even if it was grammatically a little incorrect, because it's colloquial. So that's what I learned at that point in time. I had to write it, read it back to her, and make sure, I got her approval. It's a slightly different ball game there, right? Because it's kind of like a biography. So she is a product owner. I have no right to mess with the content. My ownership is only with the structure, with the form, whereas she owns the content. And that's why I started with fiction, because there I have pretty much a lot of freedom. I can apply both. And the latest, the one, Family Secrets, there's also a certain amount of my management and corporate life. I have brought it into that novel because that's what I'm good at. That's what I used to do day in and day out, right? So it had to feature prominently in the book.
I almost feel that while you're talking, there are so many more stories that I can glean away from you. And it is also very interesting to look at your own life to say, okay, the story, and how can I ensure that the stories are being heard and told.
Yeah, I guess so. That's true. And I think it gets even more true as we get older. We just have that much more. That's all. It doesn't necessarily mean we get better or wiser. We just, that's what I would call as experience, right? The been there, done that, the volume of that goes up. And if you've been fairly perceptive and learned from some of those mistakes and learn from others' mistakes, and if you have made a mental note, to me, that is what I would value as experience. It's not necessarily, like this teacher used to say when we were kids, right? So when we were in the 10th grade or something, that's what she used to tell. So just make sure you're not just studying here 1 year 10 times. when you're studying here for the 10th year, there should be a progression. It should not just be that first year that you repeated 10 times without any improvement, right? That is the value she used to say, which I think it was very well put. I mean, for 12-year-olds or 15-year-olds, I think it did leave a mark.
It is a very impressive one, right? Right from your writing skills to your training skills, I see your evolution moving from one point to the other. In fact, one of the reasons why we do this podcast, the Software People Stories, is also just that. Can we hear the software stories and people can learn, get inspired, and apply in their own life?
Absolutely. In fact, storytelling, especially in today's corporate world, right? I mean, even when I work as a program manager, right, and I have to give a status of the project, right? It's a presentation, let's say, to leadership. To me, it's still a storytelling format. That's really the most effective way. It's like, okay, this is the introduction is really, this is where we are and these are our 2 achievements and this is the big issue or risk that we have for which we need your help. You start with those 3 things, right? And then you say, okay, now let me give you the background, how we got there. And then at the end of it, okay, this is what I want from you. And this is what I promise my team will deliver in the... So that's really the whole story arc, right? The introduction, the main part, and the conclusion. And except that, yeah, because it's just that, though that's the very flat way of how you're taught the structure, in real terms, really the introduction in fiction writing or even any storytelling, what we say is we need an inciting incident. That is what we go with. So that is how you have to hold audience attention. So even if it's a meeting, right? If it's a project status, it's more like we were doing this. And then, by the way, we got those 2 things going well. We got this appreciation. They told us this. And then this happened. So you just structure it that way. Then you structured it on the 2 good things and the 1 bad thing that happened, and you gotten everybody's attention. And then the main part of the meeting is spent on, options or how do we solve it or what went wrong or why did we do this. And then the last 10 minutes, the wrap up is really a call to action. You just don't leave, right? You're like, okay, this is where I need you. This is what we will do. And by this time, and then if that doesn't happen, this is the contingency plan. So you end with that call to action, which is the storytelling, right? So you have the protagonist, you have the inciting incident, and then stuff happens in their life. And then you go through all the complications. At the end of it, what we say is you need the emotional arc. The protagonist has to be changed in some way. If he or she is in the same spot where they are when everything started, then why did you even tell the story? You can have exceptions. You can have a nuance where you say, that is my story. After all this happening, no change is the change in that character. That's just one use case. But in most cases, that's really what is the takeaway at the end, right? That's our climax and denouement, really. Climax happens and what happens after that is the denouement.
Can you, in fact, imagine you being in a meeting and narrating your plot? Lovely. And it is, in the end of the day, sometimes I feel the presentations or PPTs have really killed that art. We are so into the box, so to speak, saying that this slide, what can I put, what is it, rather than talking from a overall story. How is it moving? What is I think that is a very beautiful way of putting it in.
I agree, because I think that's an art itself, right? I mean, at least when my team does presentations, that's what I try to train them. Personally, even to me, right, when I do a slide deck, to me, just a mnemonic. The bullets there are really mnemonics for me to put a boundary around what I'm going to talk. I really don't want to put sentences where, then the audience just sits and tries to read it. That's not the purpose, right? So what I do believe is in put in considerable visuals and just put in the key things in bullets. So the key words set off the image in my mind, and then that gets converted to an incident or a story or issue, whatever. So that is my approach, to keep it slim. And that's how I've evolved it. Like I said, again, a lot of the time, just being a program manager, not having gone further in my career because I was laterally moving all the time, in a way it helped, because I did all these things that I do like. I love making presentations. It's like, I get a high, when I'm up there making these presentations, it's a high in itself. I'm almost like an actor. And this, again, just one more thing I wanted to add. I did do improv for a bit, for 6 months. So improv is acting for non-acting.
Wow, okay.
It's a session of workshops. It's called the spontaneous exercises you do. And for me, it was really, I'm fairly uninhibited. So that's not why I was going there for. I mean, I did it for fun. But the biggest thing I learned from going to improv is my ability to listen using my body. That's really how actors do the body language, right? If they're doing a scene, they have to read each other's body language. So it's like, I can't be thinking of myself. In fact, I should be thinking of the other person I'm acting with, even when you're listening. And so we would do a lot of improv exercises, and believe it or not, it taught me I was a fairly good listener even before that, though I do talk a lot. I'm fairly good at listening. And of course, my way of listening is I usually add a word here, there. So people sometimes think I'm interrupting. Actually, I'm not. It's a little participative, but I listen. This one took it to a whole new level where I was literally listening with my body. And how I proved it to myself was I did a training course after that at the city of Tacoma, I think. It was the same project management course that I had done the last 2 years. I did it for a third time. And then at the end of it, you know how you have all this feedback. Interesting, he talks well, he communicates, conceptual clarity. So there was not that much of a change. But then, at the end of it, there's usually the last question is always about how did the faculty or instructor handle participant questions? Believe it or not, until then, I would have gotten maybe 4s and 5s there. But after I did improv, that was one attribute where everybody gave me a 5. In my ability to listen to them and address their question, suddenly went up from 80% to 100% ability. And for me, it was like, okay, it's all thanks to improv, because there we do a lot of exercises where, for example, we do a simple thing where everybody in a group, we have to say one word and keep going as long as possible and complete a trick. There, what we learn is I should try to think of the simplest word that will be a bridge between the person before me and after. Because if I use a fancy word or some big word and then it ends the story, it's over, right? So that is when you start learning this, that you have to keep listening, you have to keep thinking about others. It's not about me anymore. I'm just a speck. I just have to keep contributing to what's happening. So and then there are a whole lot of other stuff, where eye contact and coordination, that it all depends. You have to listen with your body. So that's one thing I wanted to throw out, because for me, that's been the single most exciting thing I learned from improv.
Wow, wonderful. I've never heard somebody say should listen with your entire body. It's almost, one is your mind is still. It means that you have to be there at the moment, not letting somebody thoughts going in, and also continue to be having those third stage of listening, sense that you listen as a person. Very insightful, I should say, Jen.
I'm just putting it differently. I'm probably saying the same thing. What you said, focus. I'm probably saying listen with your body. That's all.
I can relate to it. I think I know we are out of time. It's such a wonderful conversation, Jayant. I enjoyed it. Any thoughts that you want to leave the listeners with?
At least in today's world, what the world needs is your empathy and compassion. Empathy means you should be able to, I'm sure everybody knows, but I'll just repeat. Empathy means that you should be able to put yourselves into the shoes of another. And compassion means that you have to show it. An act of kindness is needed. It could just be a thought. It could be a support that you show, or it could be something much more. I think right now, where we are, the world over, those are the two things that we need. That would be my message.
Thank you, Jen. Very well put. I loved the conversation. Hope our listeners also do. And thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gayatri. I think this was fun, and I really am grateful for the opportunity.
All right.
Bye.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Malavika for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.